Okay, sorry I'm even later than usual. Um, and also I don't have my power cord for this laptop. So if it runs out of power, I guess I'll switch to my other one. Um, yes, it's a USB-C one. Yeah.
Want students to give me their power cords if I don't. So,
Thank you. Okay. All right. Power cord crisis is over. Thanks to James. Oops. Okay, so there's two things going on in the sixth meditation. Um, yeah, all right. So there's two things going on in the sixth meditation. The one is um, the existence of the world. Right, so going backwards through the first meditation, like in the fifth meditation, we showed that mathematics is secure. Um, but we still haven't shown that the world of bodies that we usually think of ourselves as knowing through the senses, that really exists. Um, so the sixth meditation is going to show that, and it's going to explain, what we can know about that world and how. Um, um, I mean, I guess I should say there's kind of two parts to this. Like, uh, on the one hand, those very general or radical doubts, like, is there an earth and a sky? Do I have a body? Right? So, we want to get completely back out of those. Um, right? So the conclusion near the end of the sixth meditation, um, accordingly, I should not have any further fears about the falsity of what my senses tell me every day. On the contrary, the exaggerated doubts of the last few days should be dismissed as laughable. Exaggerated here translates well, you'll sometimes hear Descartes' radical doubt called hyperbolic doubt. Hyperbolicae dubitationis. Hyperbolical doubts of the last days um, should be, it actually says, in Latin, it says they should be exploded as laughable. But I think they're right that exploded doesn't mean. All right. They should be dismissed as laughable, right? Secondly, in the case of all the like details, um, we can't get back certainty. I mean, well, I think it's two things. First of all, some things that I used to believe have turned out to be false. Certain things that I used to believe and used to think I was sure of have turned out to be false. Like, for example, that I know about bodies through the senses, that bodies have color. A lot of things like that have just turned out to be false. But secondly, in the case of details, they're not going to get certainty about them, but we want to at least get back probability. So like that tower that looked round from far away, but then when I went up close and looked at it from close and felt it and whatever, like that tower is pretty sure to be square, even though it looked round from far away. So you want to back that up. And to do both of those things, we're going to, of course, use the argument that God exists and is not a deceiver. But there's several new problems that come up in this context about that. So that's one thing that happens in the sixth meditation. The other thing that happens kind of at the same time is the discussion of the mind and the body and the relationship between them. And there's actually like two parts of this, right? There's the distinctness of the mind and the body, which remember in the second meditation, she said, I can't prove it yet. The meditator, that is. But remember, I call the meditator she sometimes because I think of her as Francine. Um, so the the second meditation, she said, I can't prove that they're different because I know that what I've proved to exist is a mind, a thinking thing. But I'm pretending that bodies don't exist because I don't yet know them. I don't yet know that they exist. So I'm pretending that that's completely false, that they don't exist. But for all I know, in reality, bodies do exist, and some body is the same thing as this thing that I know as a mind, right? So at that point, like we're still entertaining the hypothesis that the mind and the body might be the same thing. In the sixth meditation, the meditator is able to prove that they're different. And this rests on, I think I tried to explain this before, and I think maybe I said it wrong. I said something like, I could be wrong about whether I can think of them differently or something like that. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is what this relies on in the sixth meditation is the power of God. So what we knew in the first meditation was, I mean, in the second meditation, we discovered I can think of the mind without the body, and I can think of the body without the mind. But I didn't know how to prove from that that the mind could exist without the body and the body could exist without the mind. Now, remember, I said it's a general rationalist principle. That's like maybe the main rationalist principle for learning about things using your reason is that if you can think of things separately, then they're different. But how do we know that? And so Descartes is saying we know that because we've shown in the third meditation that God is infinitely powerful. And infinitely powerful means basically he could do anything that doesn't involve a contradiction. So if a mind without a body is conceivable, then at least by a miracle it could be produced. So therefore, minds and bodies are not the same thing. I mean, uh, uh, there would have to be a further proof to show that my mind actually will exist when my body stops existing. Which actually, I never thought of this before. Descartes does think he has a proof like that, but it's not in the meditations, is it? He just shows, as he says in the subtitle, that the mind and the body are distinct. I mean, the proof is going to go by the fact that the mind is indivisible, which he does mention here, but I don't think he draws a conclusion. Well, anyway, so as a matter of fact, like Descartes thinks that, I can know for sure that not only could my mind exist without a body, but that it will exist without a body. at some point. And he also thinks I can know that a body that is at least very much like my body can exist without a mind. He doesn't say this in the meditations either, but elsewhere he says, although he says some things that get pretty close to it, but elsewhere he says that non-human animals are just mechanical. They don't have minds. So all the things that a non-human animal can do, which is a lot, a human body also could do without a mind. And that's why, again, like those men crossing the square, even if they took their clothes off, you couldn't tell that they're not automaton. Even if you like cut them open, you couldn't tell that they're not automaton. How could you tell? Right. So anyway, so this is the distinctness of the mind and the body can now be proved, which couldn't be proved before. But on the other hand, we also need to explain the unity of the mind and body. Because, right, in some way, this body is my body and other bodies are not. So that has to be explained. What is the nature of that relationship between the two? Now, I mean, officially, he discusses this because of this, I think. Because in particularly understanding the nature of the mind-body unity is going to be an important part of understanding what the senses are for, and therefore, like, how far and about what can I trust them? So, like, because even at the very beginning of the sixth meditation, the meditator starts saying, before really proving it, before the proof of the mind and body and distinct, and that there is a body or whatever, the meditator already starts suggesting, it sure seems like the senses and the imagination work by some body being present to my mind. So that when I imagine a triangle, there's some body that's immediately present in my mind that in some way like gets a little triangle imprinted on it. And that explains the difference between imagination and thought, right? And this is where the example that I've mentioned several times of the Kiliagon actually comes in, where the meditator says, well, look, I can see that this imagining a triangle is not the same as understanding what a triangle is and being able to prove things about it. Because I can do that just as well for a Kiliagon. I can understand the definition of a Kiliagon. If you ask me what is the angle at the vertex of a regular Kiliagon, I can tell you what it is, etc., etc. But when it comes to imagining, I can do it with the triangle, but not with the Kiliagon. So, and why is that? I mean, presumably it's because this body is only so flexible or whatever, something like that. It's because of the limitations of this body. So, right, so both the senses and the imagination, in other words, there's like I guess this little move from the second meditation is also kind of reversed in the sense that remember, like at the beginning of the second meditation, the meditator assumed that the senses were powers of the body, right? And that's why she says, like, of the things that I attributed to the soul, which of them can I be sure? Can I still be sure uh, exists? And she says, sensation. I don't think I got to, I think somehow I didn't have time to talk about this when I discussed the second meditation. But even if I did, it's worth reading it again, right? So, what about the attributes I assign to the soul? So the beginning of this paragraph is, what shall I now say that I am when I am supposing there is some supremely powerful malicious deceiver, right? Like, what of the things I used to believe belong to me can I still assert? What about the attributes I assign to the soul? Nutrition or movement? Since now I do not have a body, these are mere fabrications. Sense perception? This surely does not occur without a body, right? That was the meditator's old opinion about sense perception. It obviously requires a body. Um, but that was on page 82. By the next page, after the argument that I'm a thinking thing, um, lastly, it is also the same I who has sensory perceptions or is aware of bodily things as it were through the senses. For example, I am now seeing light, hearing a noise, feeling heat, but I am asleep, so all this is false. Yet I certainly seem to see, to hear, and to be warmed. This cannot be false. What is called having a sensory perception is strictly just this. And in this restricted sense of the term, it is simply thinking, right? So between those two passages, second meditation, the meditator concluded that sense perception doesn't require a body, as far as I know, at that point, right? And that's what I said was like the invention of sense data, or that kind of internal screen where I seem to see things. Now, I mean, that doesn't go away, right? Because I mean, it's got to be there because it turns out that the shape and color and other stuff on that screen doesn't really exactly correspond to anything out there. Right? So like the tower that I see, which has a color and has a shape which can be round or square, but can't be kilodiagonal, right? Um, that can't be this, that's not the same as the tower. So, I mean, that doesn't go away, but what does come back is the idea that, I mean, as a conjecture at the beginning of the sixth meditation, but I think by the end of the sixth meditation, the conclusion is going to be that this is certainly right. That those are powers that my soul exercises using a part of the body. Um, and um, um, and if you say, what about dreaming? I think, I mean, this is pretty explicit in other places, like the passions of the soul. I think, as I said, um, in previous years, I sometimes cite some passages from the passions of the soul, you know, for this lecture. They're worth reading, but I found out that, right, I realized that reading was too long and that I didn't have enough time to talk about passions of the soul readings. So I decided it's better just in the sixth meditation. But anyway, like now I'm probably undermining myself by spending time talking about them anyway. In any case, in the Passions of the Soul, it's pretty clear that dreaming is a form of imagination, as it is in Aristotle, and it's also to be explained by what happens to this body. So even though if I dream of a triangle, there isn't really a triangle out there, there was a triangle in here. I mean, whether you have to think of this as really being a triangle shaped like impression, or whether it might be more of an analogy or something. I'm not sure. It certainly sounds like Descartes thinks it literally is like, if you looked closely, you can see a little triangle there, but I'm not sure that's right. Um, 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 okay, so all of that was by way of explaining why now, if you want to explain, if you want to decide when the senses and the imagination are reliable, um, because the senses and the imagination really are like features of the mind-body unity. They're ways that the mind uses the body and that the body affects the mind. Um, Therefore, if you want to know when they're reliable and what they're good for, you have to understand what the mind-body unity is. And the answer is going to come by way of, roughly speaking, like assuming God is not a deceiver, what can God be expected to do for the mind-body unity? Um, so uh, the mind-body unity has the features, the powers that God has given it. That is given to the mind and the body um, in order to do what's necessary for that unity. Um, if it doesn't have additional powers, then referred to God as a cause, that's a mere negation. So, I mean, it's like very abstractly, it's pretty much just a version of what we said in the fourth meditation, but very abstractly. Um, so that I think officially is why there's any discussion of this here. But of course, this is pretty important in its own right. Like Descartes wants to be able to tell you what the relationship between the mind and the body is. And like I said, it's even mentioned in the subtitle of the meditations, right? It's called Meditations on First Philosophy, in which the existence of God and the distinctness of the soul from the body is demonstrated. Now, I mean, you could see that partly as PR, right? Like he wants to put his best foot forward for the church authorities, theologians, or whatever, you know. But um, but so like um, maybe if Descartes had like given a subtitle without thinking of that, he would have mentioned something more about like the basis of physics or something. I think, you know, that's something he definitely wants to get out in the end. The world that we prove the existence of is going to be the world of Cartesian physics. Um, but I think I think he's pretty interested in this too, right? So again, like a number of things in the meditations, it comes up, you know, for a certain purpose within the plot, but it's also like independently interesting. Um, okay. So now I'm going to go into more detail about how um, the solution works. And by the solution, I mean, basically, the problem with relying on the senses is going to be, in some way, a special case of the big problem we've had all along with the God is not a deceiver arguments. Namely, that the senses seem to lead me astray, as we saw already in the first meditation, right? So if I want to say, um, I should believe the senses in cases X, Y, and Z because God is not a deceiver, that seems to prove too much because it seems to prove that the senses are always reliable and they're not. Um, so, um, so we need a solution of the kind that was given in the fourth meditation. And I think there are actually two here, that, but they both uh, pretty much have the same structure as the overall one from the fourth meditation. Um, and I think if you ask what's the relationship between these and the fourth meditation explanation, I think the answer is that um, um, the result of all of this will be that if I could only suspend judgment all the time, the senses, until certain conditions were fulfilled, the senses would never lead me astray. Um, but um, um, but since I don't suspend judgment, here are the reasons. So, right, so that was the explanation from the fourth meditation. Since the will is infinite and indivisible, whereas the intellect is finite and divisible, there are going to be cases where I have the power to affirm or deny, but the intellect doesn't guide me. Um, so in some sense, it all rests back on that, but the senses present a worse problem because it's not just indifferent. There's things that lead me, and the kind of the term for this is nature teaches me. There's things that kind of lead me to make the wrong judgment. Um, so to explain that, I think there's two things that are brought in, but they both have that same structure of unity mismatched with multiplicity, basically. So the first one um, is that there's one mind, but insofar as it's in a body, whatever that means exactly. Well, this is actually going to be the start of explaining what it means. It has like two different interests. And why does it matter what interests it has? Well, because again, the explanation is going to be that God is doing the best he can for it. Or at least that everything God has done for it is a perfection. And if it doesn't have further perfections, it can't complain. Um, so, on the one hand, it has way mind, it has an interest in the truth. You could say it's interested in the truth, but um, here meaning not just, these are obviously the same word, right? But not just it finds the truth kind of interesting, but like it has an interest in it. Um, um, so in other words, if we're just a pure mind and this were its only interest, then you would be doing your best for it by uh, um, giving it only powers that help it find the truth. It's because of what it says in the fourth meditation. It, it still, as a finite mind, wouldn't be completely free from error, because it has only powers that help it find the truth, but it has all of one of them and only part of the other one, and that mismatch again can lead to error. But you wouldn't give it any inclination to anything else. But um, but it also qua mind or soul. I mean, like, this is the context where the word soul is appropriate. I'm mostly going to talk about the mind-body unity. And I mean, Descartes treats the words mind and soul as interchangeable. Some other people, like Avicenna, might insist that you should only use the word soul when you're thinking about its relation to a body. But in any case, so maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe it's misleading about the concept. Maybe I should just say qua mind of a body. Qua mind of a body, it has an interest in preserving the mind-body unity, or mind-body unit. Now, I mean, I think ultimately, according to Descartes, this one is primary. This one is, in Kantian terminology, you might say this one is categorical. It's not for some other purpose that the mind seeks the truth. I mean, remember, in the discourse, at first it sounded like, yes, I want to be certain of the truth because it will help me get other stuff. But then he said, or then I pointed out that what he said it would help me get is all the true goods within my power. Right? And what is a true good? I mean, a true good is something that's valuable for its own sake. So, like, money is not a true good. So what is a true good? I mean, he doesn't say there, but I mean, if you think about what he says in the context and the fact that he says not being deceived is the most important thing in the world, and also the parallels to Plato's Meno. No, actually, but Descartes read the Meno. Could he have? Yes, he could have. It was translated into Latin in the Renaissance. I don't think Descartes knew Greek. But he could have read it in Latin. I don't know. I may be going on a limb by claiming that he's alluding to the Meno, but I mean, that's the exact way the argument in the Meno goes. That reaches the Socrates' conclusion that knowledge is virtue. So this is a little bit, so, as it turns out that once you find the truth about what the true goods are, what the truth is that truth is the true good. Okay, so anyway, like, I think that one is primary. Also, I guess you could say it's universalizable. It's not a private interest. I mean, certainly, like, if I know the truth and I teach you the truth, I still have just as much truth as I had before. Right? So it's not something I want for myself and not anyone else. But moreover, I mean, I don't know a place where Descartes points this out, but although I guess there's places where he kind of alludes to this principle, like when he says why he wanted to publish the discourse, that, what's shown in the Meno is that if other people know things, then it's going to help me know things. So in other words, if I know something and teach it to you, that's going to help you find out other things that you can teach to me, and then I can use those to find out other things because all knowledge is connected. So it's not only like possible, but in some sense, like, I should want everyone to get this, not just me, which is, again, part of why, like, lying is inconsistent with being an infinitely perfect being. Because an infinite perfect being doesn't have private interests that could override this. Okay, so anyway, on the other hand, the interest in the body is, well, in Kantian terms, it's hypothetical. I want the body for some purpose. Um, so the body, um, when Descartes finally answers this question, what is the nature of the mind-body unity? Um, he answers it in part by an analogy with a clock. So, I mean, a clock is a kind of tool or piece of equipment. And the word for that in Greek is organon. Right? An organon is like a tool, basically. Um, so I mean, this is the exact same thing that Aristotle says about the body. He says the soul is the entelechy, whatever that means, but it's some kind of form or perfection or actualization or something of an organized body. And again, organized means like it's well, the body as a whole is a kind of tool of the soul. It's something the soul uses. And also it's internally organized, that is, its parts serve as tools for each other, so to speak. That's right, that's why they're called organs. So I think, I mean, so a difference between Descartes and Aristotle, however, is the example they use of a tool, right? So Aristotle's example is a kind of axe. Yes. All right. Aristotle's example is a kind of axe. That's his example of a tool, right? So, like he says, if an axe were a living thing, then sharpness would be its soul or something. Descartes' example of a tool is a clock. So these are really different kinds of tools. And moreover, this is one that early modern people are thinking about a lot. Now, I mean, it's not like they didn't have some things like this in ancient times, and imagine more, right? Like in ancient and medieval stories, there's often stories of like, birds constructed with gears and whatever that sing and fly around, and they couldn't actually do that. but they imagined it. But still, like in ancient times, when you thought of a tool, you usually thought of something like this, namely, like it's only useful. It only does anything as long as I'm like holding it, right? Whereas this is a tool that even if I went away, would keep going. So this is like a first indication of how, even though Descartes and Aristotle are both thinking of this mind-body unity as an organic unity, that's going to turn out to mean something different. So, I mean, what is the body a tool for? What is the tool for according to Aristotle? I mean, ultimately for philosophy, I think. I mean, it's complicated because Aristotle thinks, and remember, we saw that there's some ambiguity about whether Descartes agrees with this or not. But Aristotle thinks not everyone is fit to do that. So, like some people, especially women and like natural slaves, are like don't have sufficient higher faculties to do this, and what they should do is listen to what people who know better tell them to do. Right? This is all Aristotle. Descartes doesn't say this. Aristotle says this, and like again, as I think I mentioned, this is part of Aristotle's pattern of defending common sense against Plato. Right? This was common sense. This is what everyone thought. Well, I don't know what the women and natural slaves would say if you asked them. But Aristotle, probably unlike Socrates, didn't ask them. Socrates in the Meno, we see him carrying out a dialogue with a slave. And perhaps among other things, reminding the slave that it's possible to run away. But in any case, right, so but ultimately, I think Aristotle thinks what the body is good for is philosophy. What does Descartes think? Well, I mean, I guess he basically thinks the same thing. That's what I was arguing, right? That like ultimately what the body is good for is finding out the truth. And there's some kinds of truth that I can find out using the body that I can't find out without it. Right, so remember way back when I pointed out that there's a kind of grasp that the body, that I can do with a body, but I can't do without a body, a literal grasp. And similarly, there's a kind of intuition or looking at something that I need the body to do. So the body, and this I think is something that Aristotle and Descartes agree about, and maybe in Plato it's less clear, right? At least a lot of times Socrates seems to be trying to convince people that the body is just an obstacle to knowing, which leaves a lot of work for Plato in some places and Plotinus and other people to try to explain, okay, well, why are there bodies then? We'd be better off without them. But I think Descartes and Aristotle agree, yes, the body is an important instrument for this. Well, if that's the case, then that sets up this dual interest here, because this mind-body unity requires special care. And it's the mind-body unity that requires the care. Let me explain what I mean by that. Rather than saying the body requires special care, it's the mind-body unity that requires special care. So, like, because a sick body is just as good a body as a healthy one, right? Regarded merely as an extended thing, it does exactly what a body's supposed to do. It follows the laws of mechanics. And that's why Descartes brings in the clock analogy, right? He says, like, a slow clock, qua body, is functioning just as well as an accurate clock. So why do we say that the slow clock is bad, that its nature is disordered? Or actually, what Descartes says in the original is that its nature is corrupt. Destroyed, partially destroyed or something like that. So like, why do we say that about the slow clock? Well, the answer is because we're giving it that predicate of disordered or corrupt. Not that's it's not an intrinsic denomination of the clock, to use technical scholastic terminology, which Descartes uses here, although they don't bring it out in the translation. So it's not an intrinsic denomination of the clock. I'm not calling the clock that because of something about the clock itself. It's an extrinsic denomination. That is, it's something that I can predicate truly of the clock only by considering it in relation to something else. And the something else obviously here is us, and we have a use for the clock. Like when we regard the clock as a clock, that is as a tool that we have a certain use for, then we can correctly say that the slow clock is, its nature is disordered, it's malfunctioning. And the same thing is supposed to be true of the body, right? So this, he says this on page 119. When we say then, with respect to the body suffering from dropsy, so dropsy is one of these weird, like, illnesses that hysteria or whatever, that we don't really believe in anymore. But I mean, that isn't any one condition, but it basically means that you're like, you're retaining water for some reason, your tissues are swollen. And I guess at least in some forms of dropsy, the person, so what you need to do is not drink. That, I mean, and this is why philosophers love to use this example, because actually most diseases are not like this. But dropsy, at least in some forms of it, makes you really thirsty. So, I don't know if I can explain why that is. But anyway, for whatever reason, the same thing that causes you to retain liquid also makes you feel really thirsty. And so actually, this disorder kind of like prevents its own cure. It's Descartes doesn't really use this feature of this here, so maybe I shouldn't talk about it so much, but like it makes it a useful analogy to mental illness. Like, you know, like philosophers will say, just as in the case of dropsy, the thing that really would be best for you is what you don't want, and the thing that you want would be bad for you. That's, the mind can be disordered in the same way. And so, I mean, not just mental illness, but I guess like vice. Right, like the vicious person, like the coward, or, you know, whatever, all those other kinds of vices. Like, once your mind is in that vicious state, you actually are repelled by what you would need to cure yourself. All right. So anyway, that's what dropsy is. So dropsy, and I guess Descartes thinks that your throat really is dry when you're thirsty. I don't think that's true. It's always wet, right? It's covered with saliva. It just feels dry. But why did we call that feeling dry? How do we know that that feeling is dry? I don't know. Anyway, because it's like when your skin feels dry. In any case, never mind. That's really irrelevant. All right. When we say then, with respect to the body suffering from dropsy, that it has a disordered nature because it has a dry throat and yet does not need drink. And here I think they mistranslated. So they put in here the term nature. All those words were inserted by the translators. I think it's the term corrupt or disordered is what it should say here. The term disordered is here used merely as an extraneous label. An extraneous label is extrinsic denomination. Right, so just as the clock is not called disordered because of something intrinsic to the clock, but is only called disordered as an extrinsic denomination relative to we who want to use it as a clock, so too the body with dropsy is qua body is fun. When we say it's disordered, that's an extrinsic denomination. We're calling that insofar as it's an organ or a tool of the soul. So that is, this body with dropsy is just as good at following the laws of mechanics as a healthy body. But for finding out the truth, it's not as good because it's sick and getting worse. um, so, um, um, but like, so I mean, this is going to be an important point in trying to in explaining how these two interests can come apart, and therefore answering our overall question. But it's also like Descartes getting in the extremeness of his dualism, right? And what's extreme about it is not, I don't remember if I said this before in this class, but even if I did, I'll say it again. What's extreme about Cartesian dualism is not how separate he thinks the mind is. Because lots of Aristotelians, and I guess basically all Platonists, agree that the mind can exist without the body. But it's extreme because of how independent the body is. Right? Like, according to Aristotle, again, he defines the soul as the entelechy of the body. And whatever entelechy means exactly, and even in ancient times, people weren't sure, right? Is a weird word. So whatever entelechy, I mean, by the way, we're going to see Leibniz using it a lot. So this is your first introduction to it. Whatever entelechy means exactly, it has something to do with the soul making the body the kind of body it is. The soul is, so to speak, the form of the body. Many Aristotelians say, yes, the soul is literally the form of the body. Others say, well, no, it's not exactly the form, it's blah, blah, blah. But it's like the form of the body in that without it, the body is something merely generic. I mean, it's like proximate matter, basically. Um, so, so when you supply the soul, you make it a human body. And that's what gives it all its like bodily powers and whatever. And so as soon as as you remove the human soul, you don't have a human body at all. Right? It still looks like a human body, but Aristotle says, so does a statue. Oh, you can say it has a hand in the sense that you can say a statue has a hand, but that hand is not really a hand because you've taken away the form that made it a hand. But Descartes' body is, and remember, this is because body is the lowest species already. It doesn't need anything else to make it fully specific. So take away the soul, and you still have the exact same substance you had there before, the body. And it would keep doing, I mean, that is, this isn't the way it usually happens. Usually the soul leaves when the body dies, right? But in principle, there's no reason that it's conceivable. God could do it if no one else. The soul could be taken away from the body while the body is alive. And if that happened, the body would keep doing the same stuff it was already. With certain exceptions, right? Descartes says the things that depend on the will. But that's actually, I mean, the hard thing for Descartes is to explain those. Spinoza and Leibniz are both going to conclude that actually the body doesn't need the soul to do anything, that it runs on its own. So actually Descartes' problem is to explain how it even makes a difference at all to this thing, that there's a mind. But whatever difference it makes to it, it's purely extrinsic. Right? It's just because we're interested in its relation to something else, a different substance. That we think of it as different when the mind is connected to it. But regarded in itself, it's the same substance with the mind or without. So that again is why Cartesian dualism is more extreme than Aristotle or Plato. Okay, so we have these two interests, and the same signals, so to speak, from the body are going to have to serve both interests. In effect, this is the theoretical interest, and this is the practical interest, right? And the body's going to have to serve both. And because of the usual differences between theory and practice, these signals are not going to be optimized for both. So that is, God is going to have to decide which thing the body, which message, so to speak, the body is going to transmit to the soul. I don't think Descartes, there is one place at least in the translation where they talk about signals. I don't think but it's not in the original. I don't think Descartes, I'm not sure if he ever uses that metaphor that's so natural to us of like signaling or sending messages or something. But I mean, it's not, even if he doesn't use it, it's not inappropriate. You know, the body, the mind has to collect information from the body, and that information both has to be suitable to the mind seeking truth using the body, but it also has to be suitable for the mind to preserve the body, because if the body dies, it doesn't have it anymore, right? So, like, I mean, even if it gets sick, it's not as good. And if it dies the way Francine's body died, then it's not available. Okay, so this was all the first mismatch, right? It's between the mind as one thing, like one signal receiver, so to speak, and the mind split into these two interests. The other one is much easier to explain, and it's just the difference between the mind and the body. Right, so this is also on this is the bottom of page 119. The first observation I make at this point is that there is a great difference between the mind and the body, inasmuch as the body is by its very nature always divisible, while the mind is utterly indivisible. Now, of course, this is a different, like before in the fourth meditation, we said the intellect is divisible and the will is indivisible. Now, obviously, we're using a different sense of divisible. in this sense, neither the will nor the intellect are divisible. They don't have parts outside of parts, the traditional definition of extension. They can't be separated into parts. I mean, like, how to make it fully precise why this kind of division is different from the other kind might be a little bit difficult, but it's a quantitative division as opposed to the division in the fourth meditation, which is, so to speak, qualitative, right? The intellect doesn't have all the features it could have. That's its finitude. But the body literally isn't all in the same place. um, so, so this is also going to give rise to errors. How does it give rise to errors? Well, so the basic problem is that the mind is, so to speak, attached to the body at one place, according to Descartes. And he doesn't say here where that place is, right? The meditator, I think, just says something like, this is on page 111. I can easily understand that if there does exist some body to which the mind is so joined that it can apply itself to contemplate it, as it were, whenever it pleases, then it may possibly be this very body that enables me to imagine corporeal things, right? So Meditator is considering kind of like one half of this, and perhaps there's some body, there's some part of the body that that the mind can turn its attention to whatever it pleases. And imagination and sense are going to go by way of that. So, like, when the mind turns its attention to this thing, it somehow then affects the mind. Like it's moving around, which is what bodies do. And somehow, this is really hard to understand. And again, Spinoza and Leibniz, Spinoza's going to just totally make fun of this. But somehow, when this body moves around, it's like the mind also kind of wiggles. And on the other hand, I guess you could see this also already in that same passage in the beginning of the sixth meditation, because the mind has to also be able, like, if I'm going to be able to imagine whatever I want, the influence also has to go the other way. And, so this is also, this body is the one that I can move immediately by moving my mind. Right? That is, my mind doesn't move in space, right? But it changes. As it changes, I can move this body around. So, in the passions of the soul, and probably the principles of philosophy too, I'm not sure. But anyway, Descartes says that this body is the pineal gland. The pineal gland is some little gland that's in the middle of the Descartes says it's suspended in the middle of the brain so it can move in any direction. And Spinoza, after making fun of this on metaphysical grounds, says, and besides, the gland he's talking about isn't really like suspended the way he says it is. So, I mean, but like science fiction version, I mean, it's probably not that much worse than the way a lot of current contemporary philosophers think about neuroscience. But in any case, right, so there's this pineal gland, and it's suspended in the middle of the brain. So here's the rest of the brain. And it's directly connected to the mind, which is incorporeal. Um, okay, so, and what happens is, um, so there's basically like animal spirits flowing around in the brain. Um, and, uh, and like eventually, this is in the very center. And whatever happens, the animal spirits floating around, moving around in the brain, it eventually gets transmitted to this and like makes impressions on it and moves it. And then like sometimes that's due just to what's going on in the brain. And that's when we get things like dreams, um, passions, strictly speaking, like fear and whatever. Descartes, this is all in the passions of the soul. Descartes says like originate with just motion within the brain. But then many times there's nerves that come out of the brain and animal spirits flow through the nerves. And they flow both directions, basically, right? So, like, on the one hand, if something happens to this hand, it will affect my hand, that will affect the nerve, it will cause animal spirits to flow through the nerve into the brain, and somehow that results in the pineal gland wiggling in a certain way. And on the other hand, if the pineal gland is already wiggling in a certain way, that can cause animal spirits to flow out this way, and that makes the hand move. So actually, despite the extreme dualism, like if you showed Descartes fMRI results, like there wouldn't be anything in there that surprised him that much, right? Like if you said, you know, hey, how come I can tell by looking at the fMRI what someone's dreaming or what they're imagining? And the answer is Descartes would say, well, that's not surprising. That's the way dreaming works. Something happens in your brain, it affects the pineal gland, and that's what makes you dream. I mean, the pineal gland thing obviously is not true. But vaguely speaking, the picture is not that wrong. But I mean, but the part of it that Descartes needs here is the part that is kind of wrong, namely that, or I mean, perhaps as Spinoza says, not only wrong, but doesn't really make sense, is that the direct connection between the mind and the body is only at that point. So in a sense, the pineal gland really is my body. In some sense of is my body. But that's not the sense Descartes thinks is important. So, right, this already like is part of the answer to what's the, or I guess we already had the answer, but this shows the application of the answer to the nature of the mind-body unity, right? Like if you think the nature of the mind-body unity is the mind is united with the body, insofar as the mind can move that body and that body can affect the mind, then you would want to say, this is the body, the pineal gland. And the rest of it is just like attached to the body, right? It's like clothing or something. But since Descartes thinks of the mind-body unity as an organic unity, he's going to include, that is, what's included in the body that the mind has to preserve for its purposes is not just the part that it can immediately, but all the parts that are organs that are needed to maintain this thing and carry it around and gather information for it and so forth. So, I mean, I think you can ask, why this sound? Why not make the mind directly connected to the whole body? Yeah.
I was gonna ask, sorry if I missed this or something, but what about like non-essential like body parts? Like if you like, you know, you could like remove your fingernail and like that would compromise the function of the pain. So Is that not part of the body, is that different?
I mean, first of all, I don't know what Descartes thinks about hands. But, I mean, if anything, it seems to be more a problem in the other direction because, like, um, they are kind of organs of the body in this sense of organ. I mean, yeah, of course, you don't need them like directly to keep the pineal gland going, but they're part of the machinery. You know, like if you ever try to, like, I don't know, like open a medicine bottle or something right after you cut your nails, you're like, I can't get it in here, right? So, I mean, and yet, like, we don't feel pain in them. I mean, we would say, first of all, they don't contain living cells, they don't contain nerves. You know, so I don't know exactly what Descartes would say about that. But probably not that important one way or the other. I mean, because like we do get whatever pain signals we need from, right? Like if you actually try to take off your fingernail, that would hurt like crazy. You know, if you like bang it with a hammer, so there's sufficient nerves around there. And similarly, like if you pull your hair, you know, I don't know. That's all I can think of to say about that.
But then can you also like remove like a single finger, right? Like it's still functional. So it's just like four fingers. Or like if you like say if we like one extra finger, right? Like I'm just thinking like say you're one to six fingers, right? Like you know, I guess you could say typically we only have five, so only would need five, so then like the six will not be a part of your body.
I mean, I think, so first of all, you know, obviously we're getting close to all kinds of philosophy of disability landmines here. Descartes probably thinks it must be true in some way. You know, I mean, forgetting the person with six fingers, just talk about someone who always had five fingers and now we're cutting one off. So Descartes presumably thinks your body, I mean, yes, you can still search for truth with a body with missing one finger, but it's not as good for it as it was before, right? So it's like, as Professor Dinishak would say, it's like a deficit view of disability. But I mean, in this case, it's like, it's hard to deny that in some sense that literally there's a deficit. Like you used to have a finger there, now you don't, right? So, I mean, the six finger case is actually like more, I mean, I think the question here is like, let's say five fingers are enough or even optimal somehow. And the sixth finger, or I mean, maybe there's some things that six fingers would be good for, but maybe people with six fingers aren't necessarily that good at that, you know, right? So like one way or another, you might say the sixth finger is, if not actually a problem, it's kind of superfluous. And then you might ask, well, why does it still have nerves in it and whatever? But, you know, I think the explanation is going to be that, again, like God makes the development of the body work in the way that's usually most advantageous, right? So if something goes wrong in that the process, and again, it's going to be because of the divisibility of the body that something can go wrong. Right? I mean, I think this is even true, right? That like, you know, like the reason the sixth finger develops is because like some things that were supposed to be together got split up and they both grew fingers. Right? Well, even if that's not true, you can imagine that something like that must be happening, right? And so sure enough, part of growing a finger is growing the nerves and everything else. And so this finger is going to be part of your body in the sense that you're going to be taught by nature that you have an interest in preserving it. That is, if something interferes with that, you're going to feel pain. even if in this particular case, maybe you'd even be better off without it. Right? I mean, consider the case of a tumor. Might be a better case. Like that's something you don't want, and it can still feel pain. Yeah. So, but I think that's the general strategy Descartes would use. Did you have a question or no? Okay. Let's get going here. It's always a dilemma. Like, I hate it when there's no questions and everyone's just staring at me. I don't know if anyone understood anything I said. So overall, questions are good, but then they always knock me off track. But oh well, I guess I get off track by myself anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Right. Okay. So what I was about to say before that was, you might ask, well, if this causes a problem, why not just make the mind directly connected to the whole? Like, since we don't really understand how this connection works, I don't think we can see any reason that that could be much bigger, right? So, but I think the answer to that is, I mean, no, I don't know. I thought of two things. I mean, it might be that that's actually worse because maybe part of the purpose of this machinery is to protect this part that's actually connected to the line. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not. I mean, the other thing to say about it, I guess, would just be, well, yes, I would be more perfect if I had that arrangement. But perhaps the world is better because some things are perfect in that way and others are not. And I can't complain that I'm one of the ones that are not. And the fact that I don't have that direct connection to the rest of my bodies is a pure negation. Right? It has no cause. So, I mean, Descartes doesn't go through any of this argument, but but it seems like an obvious question. It doesn't seem like just the fact that the mind is indivisible means it only has to be connected at one small part. I mean, but this is not a point, right? It's a whole gland. So, okay, but in any case, once we assume that this is the setup, the mind is indivisible and it's connected to only one part, and the body is divisible, then um, um, okay. You want to talk about this, yes. Well, I'll just say, then that's gonna serve as a further explanation of error. So let me then build up to the point where it becomes clear why we need that extra explanation of error. So so first of all, as we know, I mean, so like these now are the explanations of the error of why the senses can lead me astray. So first of all, as we know, practical situations require immediate decision, whereas theory can and in principle should wait for certainty. And I'm not 100% sure about, I mean, Descartes doesn't think that when you're like a baby, you should wait for certainty before forming opinions. It's only once you reach the age of reason or something that you should be able to do that. But in any case, for theory, it's at least acceptable to say, look, be patient. And you'll be able to figure out which way to judge. But for practice, you can't say, um, um, you can't say, wait, be patient, and you'll figure out what you'll be able to infer from this great truth that you've learned, that you should stop walking and not fall off the cliff, or that you should drink before you get dehydrated. Right? Like all those things can't wait for Descartes to write the Principles of Philosophy and you to read it and understand it. And then, oh, I see. So if that such and such is going on in the corpuscles in my body, that means I should find something that looks like this. And that, I mean, but of course, it wouldn't look like water. I would know. Right? If we imagine that the signals that sent to my mind are optimized for this, like I would be looking for a certain kind of microstructure somewhere and trying to find a way to get something like that to go into the right. So like that would be a very long, complicated process, and I would die of thirst before I finished that. So all of that, what all of that adds up to is that this is why nature has to teach me some things. And the things nature teaches me are, well, I mean, the main thing nature teaches me, this is on page 116. There is nothing that my own nature teaches me more vividly than that I have a body, and that when I feel pain, there is something wrong with the body, and that when I am hungry or thirsty, the body needs food or drink, and so on. Next paragraph. This nature also teaches me by these sensations of pain, hunger, thirst, and so on, that I am not merely present in my body as a sailor is present in a ship, but am very closely joined to it, and as it were intermingled with it, so that I and the body form a unit. If this were not so, I, who am nothing but a thinking being, would not feel pain when the body was hurt, but would perceive the damage purely by the intellect, just as a sailor perceives by sight if anything in his ship is broken. Right? So first of all, this metaphor of a sailor in a ship is like, it comes from Aristotle, and it like goes back and forth between Aristotelian and Platonists, whether the body is or is not like a sailor in a ship. So, right. And Descartes is saying, nature teaches me that my mind is not in the body merely as a sailor in a ship. You know, the truth is that my mind really is in a body as a sailor in a ship. So, I mean, in some sense, according to Descartes. Right? That is a ship. A ship is actually a good example of a kind of tool or machine they had in ancient times that's getting closer to being like a clock. I mean, it can't go very long without sailors, right? But it's the sailors aren't literally moving it. They're just, so like, this body goes along by itself, kind of floats along by itself. And this mind is something that wouldn't have to be in this body. It could be in another body, it could be not in a body at all. It, eventually will go away when this body is finished. And yet, as long as it's in this body, it uses this body as its tool to get around, to get stuff for it, to get information, etc. So, I mean, that is pretty much like being a sailor in a ship. So, in a way, nature teaches me something false here. Right? That is, by giving me that sensation of pain, which doesn't leave room for thinking and inference, but just inclines me right away to the belief that I better do something about this hand. Because it's my hand. Nature is, so to speak, right? That is, I feel like when I feel pain in this hand, I feel like I'm in pain in the hand. And that's false from several points of view, right? Like the hand isn't really me. And the pain isn't really in the hand. The pain is in me. And in the hand is something else, which again, unless I've done like a great study of like Descartes thinks he's done, of how bodies work and whatever, what's actually in the hand is something I don't have the faintest idea of. Animal spirits, right? So, and yet you can see why for this interest, it's crucial that nature teach me that. So if like the God had to decide between giving me this kind of knowledge in my hand and this kind of knowledge in my hand, this one was definitely better. And then if you ask, well, but wait a second, like, is God going to let me go around thinking this false thing forever? The answer is no. I have another faculty by which this can be corrected. In due time, if I think about it, as the meditator does, I'll learn what the true situation is. And then, I mean, I'll still react to pain the way I used to, but I'll know that it doesn't really mean what I thought it meant. Again, I don't know whether to say this is literally an illusion. It seems like maybe it is. But if you remember the reading from Thomas Aquinas on the Eucharist that I never had time to talk about, and I don't really have time now either, but I'm going to talk about it. Right, like, because there the question was, I mean, it really seemed, maybe not from Thomas himself, but from some of the like Thomistic books that Descartes read at La Flèche. Because the question there is, how can the accidents of the wafer remain when what the substance that's there now is the body of Christ? Isn't that deceptive? Right? And isn't that inappropriate to God, who's not a deceiver? That's literally the question that Thomas is asking there. And his answer is, well, the senses don't really deceive. What the senses tell us that the accidents are there, and the accidents really are there. But, and as for the intellect, it's corrected by faith. So it's kind of the same answer here. Like, this doesn't really deceive for the purpose it's meant for. The purpose it's meant for is preserving the mind-body unit, and it gives you exactly the right message for that. But when it comes to the intellect, to the theoretical interest, we've been given other faculties that allow us to correct this, given time. We won't always have time, we usually don't. And that's why we'll be both uncertain and sometimes mistaken about the world, but we can be sure that we can find the truth, or at least the probable truth, if we're patient. And also we can be, it follows from this that like those very general things, like that I have a body, that there's an earth, that there's a sky, that, you know, like those things I can't be wrong about. So the meditator says, like, I can be completely certain about those. And as for particular things like the tower, you know, if I've really examined it and used my memory and my intellect and, you know, been very careful, then I don't have to have any doubt that it's square. I mean, I think probably you should say I have only a slight doubt or something like that, but he actually said I'm completely certain. Um, okay, and so, but the only problem that's left here is, the problem of dropsy and cases like that. Right? That is, there's sometimes when nature seems to teach me to do something for the body that's actually bad for the mind body. And that's where this thing about the divisibility of the body comes in. So actually, Descartes talks about a foot. Right. So, so like these nerves are set up so that in the usual case, they'll usually transmit to me what the body actually should do. So the usual case of this nerve being told and animal spirits going through it in a certain way, since the end of the nerve is here, it's usually because of something that happens in the foot. And so nature teaches me that I'm feeling pain in the foot. Whenever those signals go up this nerve, wiggle the pineal gland as they do. But Descartes says, since all bodies are divisible, there's always infinitely many places in between where you can move this nerve the same way it would have moved if something happened in the foot. And when you do that, since like this has to be set up one way, that signal is going to, again, nature's going to teach you that something's wrong with your foot, but actually something's wrong with your back. Right? And this actually happens, right? If things are wrong with your back, like your lower back, you feel pain in your legs. So Descartes talking about an actual case here. And he says, like, in general, this kind of thing can't be avoided because of this mismatch, right? And so again, God had to decide what's the best way to set it up. And obviously the best way to set it up is so that it gives the right signal in the usual case, even though that means in an abnormal case, it's going to give the wrong signal, right? And the same goes for the dry throat and dropsy and so forth. The one thing, oh, actually, this watch is slow. I'm actually at overtime. So I will not talk about the one thing. And we'll start talking about Spinoza Thursday. See you then. Bye.